Have you ever sat across from a stranger and felt the weight of your entire life hanging on one silent choice? Imagine this: a billionaire, dressed like any ordinary man, walks into a quiet diner on Chicago's South Side. He just wants coffee, nothing more. But then a waitress, a single black mother, slips him a folded note. A note that would change everything. Why would she risk it? What kind of fear or courage pushes someone to reach out to a man she barely knows? And if you were in her shoes, what would you do? Stay silent to survive, or speak up and risk it all? This isn't just about a cup of coffee. It's about dignity, power, and the moment when silence can no longer protect you. So tonight, step into that diner with us. Ask yourself, what would you have done, and what would it mean if one quiet act could shake an empire? If this story stirs something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. The sky over Chicago was still gray when Christopher Hale pushed open the glass door of the Harbor Light Diner. It was the kind of place most people passed without a glance. Neon sign half flickering, coffee smell drifting into the cold air. A bell above the door jingled softly, announcing his arrival. He looked like any tired man starting his day early. Worn jacket, faded jeans, a knit cap pulled low against the autumn chill. He carried no briefcase, wore no expensive watch. Only his eyes gave something away. Calm, steady, with a weight behind them that few noticed. Christopher slid into a booth by the window. Outside, the streets of the South Side were waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled. A woman hurried with her child, clutching a backpack too big for her shoulders. He watched quietly, his breath fogging the glass for a moment before fading. No one in the diner knew that this quiet man controlled one of the nation's largest transportation empires. No one knew the suit in his closet was tailored in New York, or that boardrooms in Washington paused when he spoke. Here, in this booth, he was invisible. That was how he wanted it. A waitress appeared at his side, pad in hand. "Morning," she said, her voice warm, though her eyes looked tired. "Coffee." Christopher nodded. "Please, black." She smiled faintly. "You got it." Her name tag read Naomi. Her hair was pulled back, though a few curls escaped. There was a softness to her voice, but also something heavy, like she carried more than the plates balanced on her arm. As she walked away, Christopher glanced around the diner. 2 truck drivers hunched over eggs and toast. A man in a suit scrolled his phone. An older woman read a newspaper, glasses sliding down her nose. Ordinary lives, ordinary moments. That was why he came here, among strangers. He could just breathe. Naomi returned with the coffee. The mug clinked softly on the table. "Careful. It's hot," she said. "Thank you." Christopher wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth soak into his fingers. For a moment, he studied her face, lines of fatigue, but a strength underneath, the kind that comes from surviving more than a fair share of storms. "You work the morning shift often?" he asked. She gave a small laugh. "Feels like I live here, but the tips are better than nights." Christopher smiled politely. "Long hours." "Yeah," she said quietly, "but rent doesn't pay itself." Before he could reply, a sharp voice cut through the diner. "Naomi." A man in a crisp shirt and too bright tie stood near the counter. Broad shoulders, slicked back hair. His name tag read Victor. "You forget the order for table 6 again," Victor barked. Naomi flinched slightly. "I'm on it, sir." She hurried toward the kitchen, shoulders tense. Christopher sipped his coffee, watching. He had seen that look before, people forced to shrink, to endure humiliation because they had no choice. A knot tightened in his chest. Minutes passed. He let the mug warm his hands while the diner buzzed with clattering plates and low chatter. Naomi moved quickly, serving, smiling at customers, hiding the tension in her posture. Victor, however, kept a watchful eye, his gaze sharp whenever she slowed. The door chimed again. Cold air rushed in with a couple arguing softly. Naomi greeted them with the same gentle smile, though her eyes looked distant, almost fragile. Christopher leaned back in the booth, exhaling slowly. He had come here to disappear, to drink his coffee like any other man. But the diner carried stories, and sometimes stories refused to stay quiet. He thought of his mother years ago, working double shifts in a laundry so he could have shoes for school. He thought of the teachers who doubted him, the doors that closed simply because of the color of his skin. Every success he carried had been carved out of those memories. That was why he noticed people like Naomi. She returned with his bill, slipping it on the table. Her hand trembled slightly. Christopher caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. Then, as if by accident, something small slid beneath the edge of the receipt. A folded piece of paper, smudged with grease from her fingers. Her voice was steady, but her eyes begged him not to react. "Whenever you're ready, sir." Christopher nodded slowly, pretending to glance at the total. He waited until she walked away before sliding the note closer. The paper was thin, edges frayed. His thumb brushed the crease before he unfolded it under the table. The words were hurried, uneven. "They're stealing. Millions. I'm scared for my daughter. Please." The breath caught in his throat. He read the words twice, then 3 times. Outside, a bus roared past. Inside, dishes clattered in the sink. Life moved on, unaware that in one man's hands, a fragile cry for help had just shifted everything. Christopher folded the note carefully, sliding it into his jacket pocket. His heart beat steady, but harder than before. He had come for coffee. Instead, he found a truth that demanded he could no longer stay invisible. He lifted the mug again, staring into the dark liquid. Naomi moved between tables, her smile fixed, her eyes glancing nervously at Victor by the counter. Christopher watched in silence, the weight of the note pressing against his chest. It was only the beginning. Naomi Carter's day didn't end when her shift at Harbor Light Diner was over. For her, the long hours behind the counter were only half the story. The other half lived in a small apartment 3 blocks away, where the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence and a child's drawings covered the fridge door. At 10 o'clock that night, Naomi slipped quietly into her apartment. She tried not to wake her daughter. Though the hinges squeaked no matter how gently she turned the key, the smell of old carpet and laundry soap greeted her. Shoes kicked off in the corner, a thin blanket draped over the couch. "Mom," a sleepy voice called. Naomi's heart softened. "Go back to sleep, baby," she whispered. But 8-year-old Lila Carter was already padding down the hallway in her pajamas, hair messy from dreams. She wrapped her arms around Naomi's waist. "You're late again." "I know. Sweetheart." Naomi kissed the top of her daughter's head. "But I'm here now." Lila tilted her head, studying her mother's face with the sharp honesty only children carry. "You're tired." Naomi chuckled softly. "Maybe just a little." They sat together on the couch, Naomi stroking her daughter's hair. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of traffic outside. Naomi inhaled deeply, trying to push away the image of Victor Kane's glare, the harsh tone of his voice still echoing in her mind. "Did Mr. Kane yell at you again?" Lila asked suddenly. Naomi froze. "Why would you ask that?" Because you get that look, Lila said softly. The same look you had last week, and the week before. Naomi blinked back tears. She didn't want her daughter carrying that burden. Don't worry about that, honey. Mom's strong. But inside, Naomi felt anything but strong. She thought of the folded receipts she kept hidden under her mattress, each marked with numbers that didn't add up. She thought of the missing shipments, the threats whispered when she asked questions. She thought of Victor's words, sharp as knives. Keep quiet, or you'll regret it. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it and saw a message from Victor. Tomorrow. Double shift. Don't be late. No please, no thank you. Just command. Naomi turned the phone face down. Her chest tightened. She pulled Lila closer, as if shielding her from words the girl didn't even see. Mom, Lila whispered, when I grow up, I'm gonna buy you a big house, with windows that don't stick, and a bed that doesn't squeak, and you won't have to work all the time. Naomi laughed softly, but tears slipped down her cheeks. That sounds nice. You'll see, Lila promised, and we'll have pancakes every day. Every day, Naomi teased gently. Every single day. Naomi kissed her daughter's forehead. I'll hold you to that. They sat quietly until Lila drifted back to sleep, her head heavy on Naomi's lap. Naomi carried her to bed, tucking the blanket snugly around her small frame. She stood for a moment in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe, fragile and safe for now. In the stillness of the apartment, Naomi whispered to herself, I can't keep living like this. She thought about the note she had slipped to the quiet man at the diner that morning, the words she had scribbled in haste. They're stealing. I'm scared for my daughter. What if he had laughed? What if he had shown Victor? What if she had made everything worse? Her stomach knotted, but when she remembered the man's steady eyes, the way he hadn't flinched when Victor barked across the room, she felt a glimmer of something rare. Hope. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She had taken a risk, and risks had consequences. She had learned that lesson too many times. Naomi walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. The clock ticked past midnight. Her mind wandered back to the day Victor cornered her in the storage room. You ask too many questions, he had said, his voice low and dangerous. Do you know what happens to people who don't know their place? She had stared at the floor, her pulse hammering. I just want to do my job. Then do it. And keep your mouth shut. The memory still made her shiver. She hated how small she had felt, how powerless. But when she looked at Lila's drawings taped to the fridge rainbows, stick figures holding hands, a smiling sun, why, she knew why she had written that note. Not for herself, for her daughter. The next morning came too soon. Naomi dressed quickly, tying her apron with weary fingers. She kissed Lila goodbye and walked to the diner, the autumn wind biting her cheeks. The streets buzzed with life buses, horns, the chatter of neighbors on their way to work. To everyone else, it was just another morning. To Naomi, it felt like the edge of a cliff. At Harbor Light Diner, the neon sign hummed faintly. She pushed the door open, bracing herself. Victor was already there, standing behind the counter, his expression sour. You're late, he snapped. It's 7:05. Naomi replied quietly. Late, he repeated, as if daring her to argue. Naomi lowered her eyes. Yes, sir. She moved through the shift like a ghost, her smile painted on, her voice polite, but inside her mind churned. Every time the door opened, she half expected to see the quiet man again. She wondered if he had read her note, if he would come back, if he even cared. By mid-morning, she carried a tray of coffee to a table of construction workers. One of them joked loudly, making her laugh despite herself. For a moment, she felt almost normal. But then she caught Victor's glare from across the room, and her smile faded. In the kitchen, Marcus Reed, the head cook, gave her a sympathetic look. He was a kind man, always slipping her extra rolls to take home. "Rough morning?" he asked. "Same as always," she murmured. Marcus sighed. "One of these days, someone's got to put Victor in his place." Naomi lowered her voice. "You've seen the invoices, right? The numbers don't match." Marcus stiffened. "Naomi, you don't want to get mixed up in that." "I already am," she whispered. Marcus glanced nervously toward the door. "Keep your head down. For your girl's sake." Naomi swallowed hard. She knew he was right, but silence felt like surrender, and surrender was something she could no longer afford. That night, as she walked home, the city lights flickered in puddles on the sidewalk. She clutched her jacket tighter, her thoughts circling. She didn't know if the man with the calm eyes would ever return, but deep down, she prayed he would, because Naomi Carter was running out of time. The next week at Harbor Light Diner felt heavier than usual. Naomi Carter sensed it the moment she tied her apron and stepped onto the floor. The clinking of dishes, the hiss of the grill, the steady buzz of the neon sign. It all seemed sharper, louder, as though the walls themselves carried tension. Victor Kane had been in a foul mood since sunrise. He barked orders at the kitchen staff, criticized the way the booths were wiped down, and muttered insults when customers weren't listening. But his sharpest words were always reserved for Naomi. "Pick up the pace," Victor snapped as Naomi delivered plates of pancakes to a table of tourists. "You think customers pay to see you drag your feet?" Naomi lowered her head. "Yes, sir." Her cheeks burned. She could feel the tourists' eyes on her, their awkward silence filling the space where laughter had been. She forced a smile and set down the plates. "Enjoy your meal," she whispered, when she turned back. Victor was standing at the counter with his arms crossed, lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. He thrived on making her small. Marcus Reed, from behind the grill, caught Naomi's eye and shook his head slightly, a silent warning not to push back. But Marcus's eyes also carried sympathy, a quiet reminder that someone else saw. The morning crowd grew, orders stacked high, coffee pots emptied faster than she could refill them. Naomi moved quickly, balancing trays, her back aching from hours on her feet. She tried to tune out Victor's voice, but it slashed through the diner like a whip. At 10 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled. Naomi glanced up and froze. Christopher Hale had returned. He wore the same faded jacket, the same knit cap. To anyone else, he looked like an ordinary man stopping for coffee. But Naomi felt her pulse quicken. Did he read her note? Was this a coincidence, or had he come back because of her? Christopher gave a small nod when their eyes met. It wasn't a smile, exactly, but it carried reassurance. Naomi inhaled deeply and walked over. "Pen ready." "Coffee again?" she asked softly. "Please," he said. His voice was calm, steady. As she poured, his eyes lingered on her face, as though searching for the truth she had written. Naomi wanted to ask, wanted to know if he believed her. But with Victor prowling near the counter, she dared not. Instead, she placed the mug gently before him. Anything else? For now, just the coffee. Naomi gave a small nod and stepped away, her chest tight. Across the diner, Victor's voice rose again. This time, It wasn't a low insult. It was public. Deliberate. "Naomi," he barked, "you forgot to wipe down table 7. How many times do I have to tell you clean means clean? Do I have to do your job for you?" The customers at table 7 shifted uncomfortably. Naomi's face flushed. "I'll get it right away." Victor stepped closer, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You better, because mistakes like that cost this diner money, and we don't pay people to waste time." Christopher watched silently, his jaw tightening. He had seen injustice in boardrooms, in contracts written to exclude, in laws bent to benefit the powerful. But watching Naomi endure humiliation in front of strangers stirred something deeper. Naomi grabbed a rag and bent to wipe the table, her hands trembling. She could hear whispers from the nearby booth, a mix of pity and discomfort. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "Unbelievable," Victor muttered, shaking his head theatrically as if performing for the room. Marcus slammed a spatula onto the grill. "That's enough. Victor." The diner went quiet. All eyes turned to the cook, his apron stained with grease, his hands clenched. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Marcus said, his voice steady. "She's doing her job. You don't need to treat her like dirt." The silence deepened. Naomi's heart pounded. Victor laughed, sharp and cruel. "Careful. Marcus, you want to keep your job." "Right." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The air in the diner felt heavy, charged. Naomi finished wiping the table, her face pale. Christopher raised his mug, taking a slow sip, but his mind raced. He saw the imbalance of power, the cruelty masked as authority, and he knew he couldn't stay silent much longer. Minutes later, Naomi returned to his booth with his bill. Her eyes were downcast, her voice a whisper. "I'm sorry you had to see that." Christopher shook his head gently. "You don't need to apologize." She hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "Did you read it?" Christopher's expression didn't change, but his eyes met hers with quiet certainty. "Yes." Relief flickered across her face. For a moment, she felt less alone. But then Victor's voice cut through again. "Naomi breaks over. Get back on the floor." Naomi straightened quickly. The moment shattered. She nodded to Christopher and hurried away. Christopher sat back in the booth, the note still weighing in his pocket. He had planned to stay invisible, to let the world spin without him. But invisibility wasn't an option anymore. He thought of Naomi's daughter, the promise hidden between the desperate lines of her handwriting. He thought of the injustice he had just witnessed, raw and unfiltered. He had built his empire by fighting battles no one thought he could win. This was no different. The bell above the door jingled again, and 2 men in leather jackets walked in. They went straight to Victor, whispering in low voices. Cash exchanged hands. Boxes marked with the diner's supplier logo were carried out the back door minutes later. Christopher noticed. Naomi noticed, too. Her eyes darted to the kitchen, then back to Christopher, fear rising. Victor caught her staring. "Naomi, mind your own business," he snapped, "or you won't have a job tomorrow." The words cut through her like a blade. She turned away quickly, fighting the sting of tears. Christopher placed a few bills on the table and stood. He adjusted his jacket, gave one last look at Naomi, and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, the cold wind struck his face. His decision was made. The fight was no longer just hers. The wind whipped across Chicago's streets as Naomi Carter walked home after another double shift. Her feet ached, her shoulders burned, but she kept moving. The sidewalks were lined with puddles from an earlier rain, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights. She held her jacket tight, her breath visible in the night air. Home was a third-floor walk-up in an aging brick building. The stairwell smelled faintly of old paint and boiled cabbage from a neighbor's dinner. Naomi climbed slowly, her body heavy with fatigue. Each step creaked beneath her weight, a reminder of how fragile everything around her seemed. Inside the apartment, warmth and light greeted her. Lila was curled up on the couch, drawing in a notebook. Colored pencils lay scattered like fallen leaves. She looked up, her face brightening. "Mom, you're home." Naomi forced a smile. "Hey, baby girl, did you eat dinner?" "Yeah, Mrs. Lopez brought us soup again." Naomi's chest tightened. Janice Lopez, the elderly neighbor down the hall, often helped when Naomi's shifts ran long. That was kind of her. Naomi said, "We'll have to thank her tomorrow." Lila nodded eagerly, then held up her drawing. "Look, Mom, it's us. See, that's you, and that's me, and that's our house someday." The picture showed a neat little home with a yard and a big sun in the corner. Naomi's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." She hugged her daughter, breathing in the scent of crayons and shampoo. In that moment, all the exhaustion, all the humiliation of the day, melted into something softer. But it never lasted long. Reality always crept back, later, after Lila was asleep. Naomi sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unopened bills, electricity, rent, medical. She rubbed her temples, staring at the numbers that never added up. Her paycheck barely covered the basics, and Victor's threats made every shift feel like walking a tightrope. The note she had slipped to Christopher Hale replayed in her mind. "They're stealing. I'm scared for my daughter." Did he believe her? Would he help? Or had she just placed herself in even greater danger? She remembered his steady eyes, the calm way he watched without judging. There had been something different about him, something solid, yet doubt gnawed at her. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe he would never return. Naomi sighed and put the bills aside. She poured herself a glass of water and sat quietly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood. Growing up on the South Side, she had seen her own mother work 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night and waiting tables during the day. Her mother used to say, "Dignity is worth more than money." Naomi wondered if her mother would still believe that after seeing the world now. The next morning came too quickly. The alarm buzzed at 5:30, and Naomi dragged herself out of bed. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake Lila. The little girl stirred anyway, rubbing her eyes. "Do you have to go already?" Naomi brushed her daughter's hair back gently. "I'll be home before bedtime tonight. I promise." Pinky promise. Naomi hooked her pinky with Lila's. Pinky promise. At the diner. The day began as usual. Coffee brewed. Plates clattered. Customers shuffled in with sleepy eyes. Naomi moved with practiced grace, greeting each table with a tired but genuine smile. Victor was already pacing behind the counter, barking instructions. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud. He made a show of checking receipts, counting cash, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone. Naomi carried on, though her stomach knotted with every step. She poured coffee for a regular customer, Mr. Harris, who read the morning paper at the same booth every day. "You're too good for this place," he muttered kindly as she topped off his cup. Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe one day, in the kitchen." Marcus Reed worked the grill, flipping pancakes with a rhythm that almost sounded like music. He looked up as Naomi passed. "You holding up?" She shrugged, trying. Marcus frowned. "Be careful. Naomi, Victor's been on edge. Heard him talking on the phone about numbers not matching up." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Did you hear anything else?" Marcus shook his head. "Just watch your back." Hours passed. By midday, the diner buzzed with customers. The rush was exhausting but familiar. Then, as Naomi set down a plate of eggs, she noticed Christopher Hale at his booth again. Her heart skipped. He was back. She walked over, steadying her voice. "Coffee?" "Yes, please," Christopher said. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried weight. As she poured, he spoke quietly. "We'll talk soon." Naomi froze for just a second before nodding, pretending nothing unusual had been said, but her chest tightened with a mixture of fear and relief. Victor's voice boomed from across the room. "Naomi, quit standing around." The customers looked up. Naomi flushed, muttered an apology, and hurried away. Christopher's gaze followed her, his jaw set. That night, after her shift, Naomi walked home through the chilly streets. She stopped at a corner store to buy milk, stretching her last few dollars. In the reflection of the glass door, she thought she saw someone watching, a shadow that lingered too long. She quickened her pace, clutching the bag to her chest. When she reached her apartment, she locked the door twice. Lila ran to greet her, but Naomi couldn't shake the unease. She looked out the window, scanning the street below. Empty. But the feeling remained. Later, as she tucked Lila into bed, the little girl whispered, "Mom, are we safe?" Naomi hesitated. She wanted to lie, to say yes without doubt. Instead, she kissed her daughter's forehead. "As long as I'm here, you're safe." But deep down, Naomi knew the truth. Safety was fragile. And if Victor suspected she had spoken out, everything she loved could be ripped away. Still, as she sat alone at the table that night, Naomi clung to one fragile thread of hope, the man in the diner with the calm eyes, the one who had read her note. Somewhere deep inside, she prayed he was more than he seemed. Christopher Hale had not slept well. The words scribbled on that crumpled note haunted him through the night. "They're stealing. Millions. I'm scared for my daughter. For a man used to commanding boardrooms and navigating billion-dollar negotiations, he should have been able to compartmentalize, to push it aside until morning. But this was different. These weren't numbers on a balance sheet. These were the words of a woman who had slipped the note with trembling fingers, eyes pleading while pretending to smile. By dawn, Christopher knew he couldn't ignore it. He had planned to leave Chicago quietly in a few days. Now, leaving wasn't an option. At mid-morning, he returned to the Harbor Light Diner. The bell above the door jingled as usual, and Victor Kane's sharp gaze darted toward him immediately. Victor gave a forced smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Back again," Victor said. "Guess our coffee really is addictive." Christopher chuckled lightly, masking his intent. "Something like that." Naomi Carter was working a nearby table. When her eyes met Christopher's, there was the faintest flicker of recognition, fear mixed with fragile hope. She didn't linger, just offered her practiced smile and continued pouring coffee for a pair of truckers. Christopher chose the same booth by the window. He ordered nothing but coffee. He waited. Minutes later, Naomi appeared with the pot. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured. Christopher kept his voice calm, quiet enough only she could hear. "After your shift, corner of 63rd and Maple. There's a bakery. Meet me there. No one else." Naomi's face didn't change, but the pot wavered in her grip. She steadied it quickly, nodded almost imperceptibly, and walked away. Victor's voice carried from the counter. "Naomi, let's not keep our customers waiting." She froze for a heartbeat, then forced a smile at Christopher before hurrying off. He sipped his coffee, hiding the storm that brewed inside him. That evening, Naomi walked quickly down Maple Street. The bakery Christopher had named sat at the corner, its windows glowing softly. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and warm bread. A few customers lingered with pastries and coffee. Christopher sat in the back, away from the windows. He looked ordinary in his simple jacket and knit cap, but there was something unshakable in the way he held himself. Naomi slid into the booth opposite him, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If Victor finds out, he won't," Christopher said firmly. "You're safe here." Naomi's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know why I trusted you. You're just a customer." Christopher leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "You trusted me because you had no one else, and because you saw in me something you couldn't ignore." Her eyes glistened. "They're laundering money through the diner. I started noticing the books didn't add up cash going out. That never came in. Vendors that don't exist. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Then I found receipts hidden in the back office. Victor caught me once. He said if I talked, he'd ruin me. Or worse." Christopher's jaw tightened. "Worse." Naomi's voice cracked. "I have a daughter, Lila. She's only 8. He said accidents happen, fires, break-ins. I believe him." Christopher exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to slam his fist on the table. He had seen ruthless men before, but hearing Naomi's quiet terror made it personal. "Naomi," he said softly, "I need you to trust me a little longer. What you're telling me is serious, dangerous, but it can be stopped." She shook her head. "You don't understand. People like Victor, he has connections. The police don't care. I tried once, years ago, to report something smaller. Nothing happened. He made my life miserable for months." Christopher studied her, the weight of his decision pressing on him. He could reveal who he was. He could tell her that he had the resources, the influence, the reach to crush Victor Kane overnight. But revealing that truth carried risk of exposure before he had all the facts. Risk of losing the fragile trust Naomi had placed in him. "Instead," he said, "let me help. Quietly. For now. Do you still have those receipts?" Naomi nodded hesitantly. "Hidden at home." "Good," Christopher replied. "Keep them safe. Don't bring them out yet. But when the time comes, we'll need proof. And Naomi, if anything happens, call this number." He slid a card across the table. It looked plain, with only 10 digits printed in bold. No name, no logo. Naomi picked it up carefully, her fingers brushing the paper like it might vanish. "Who are you?" she asked. Christopher held her gaze. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then he said, "Someone who's been where you are. Someone who refuses to let fear win." Naomi blinked back tears. She wanted to ask more, but the sound of the bakery door opening made her flinch. A couple walked in, laughing. She exhaled shakily. "I have to go," she whispered. "Lila's waiting." Christopher nodded. "Go. And Naomi, keep acting normal at the diner. Don't let Victor suspect a thing." She rose, clutching the card in her hand. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel hope. When she left, Christopher sat back, running a hand over his face. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling on him. Naomi wasn't just a waitress caught in corruption. She was a mother, a fighter, a survivor. And now, unknowingly, she had tied her future to him. Later that night, in his hotel room, Christopher opened his laptop. The glow of the screen lit his determined face. He typed a secure message to his most trusted associate, Elena Brooks. Need a deep dive on Victor Kane. Start with Harbor Light Diner. Track finances, vendors, connections. Quietly. Use only our people. Elena's reply came within minutes. Understood. We'll begin immediately. Stay safe. Christopher closed the laptop and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights shimmered against the dark lake. Somewhere across that expanse, Naomi Carter tucked her daughter into bed, clutching a plain card with 10 digits. He whispered into the night, "You're not alone anymore." The storm was coming. Christopher Hale sat in his hotel suite overlooking the river, the curtains half drawn against the night. The city buzzed below with horns, laughter, and sirens, but his mind was elsewhere. On his desk lay Naomi Carter's note, folded carefully, its edges worn from his fingers tracing it again and again. "They're stealing. Millions. I'm scared for my daughter." He read it once more, as though the ink itself might change, as if more truth might appear between the lines. But the words were the same, urgent, raw. Christopher opened his laptop. The screen lit up his face, calm but resolute. A secure channel blinked to life, connecting him to Elena Brooks, his most trusted associate. Elena's voice came through the encrypted line, steady and precise. "We dug into Victor Kane like you asked. What we found, it's bigger than a diner." Christopher leaned forward. "Tell me, on paper." "Harbor Light. Diner's part of a small chain, all run through a holding company called Eastgate Services. But Eastgate doesn't exist in any legitimate registry. Shell paperwork, dummy addresses, cash is moving through multiple accounts, then vanishing into offshore banks." "How much?" Christopher asked. "Conservatively, several million a year. Possibly more." Christopher exhaled slowly. The scope was worse than he expected, and Victor Elena hesitated. "He's not the top. He's a middleman. His personal accounts show regular deposits well above his salary. We trace connections to a man named David Lang, Regional Operations Director for Eastgate. But even Lang isn't clean. He reports to someone else. We're still digging." Christopher rubbed his temples. "And law enforcement compromised, at least locally. We found evidence of payoffs to inspectors, maybe even a couple of police officers. If Naomi tried reporting before, it makes sense nothing happened." Christopher's jaw tightened. Naomi's fear for her daughter was not paranoia. It was survival. "Elena," he said, "I want a full map of this network. Every diner, every shell company, every name that touches it. Quietly. No one outside our circle. And dig into Victor personally. Family, habits, weak points. I need to know who he is behind the facade." "Understood," Eleanor replied. "But Christopher, how involved do you want to be? This isn't your business empire. It's dangerous." Christopher's eyes flicked to the note again. "It became my business the moment she slipped me that paper. When a mother is cornered with no way out, and the system looks the other way, I don't get to walk past. We'll expose this, but carefully. No moves until we're sure." There was silence on the line for a beat, then Elena's voice softened. "You always did choose the fights no one else would?" Christopher allowed himself the faintest smile. "That's why you've stuck with me. After the call," he sat in silence, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy, but beneath it was something deeper, a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just a billionaire hiding in plain sight. He was a man who still believed justice mattered. The next day, Christopher returned to the diner. He dressed the same as always, plain jacket, knit cap, but his eyes carried the quiet intensity of a man with a plan. Naomi Carter was working the morning shift, moving between tables with her practiced smile. When she saw him, her breath caught slightly. She poured his coffee as if nothing were unusual, but her hand brushed his lightly as she set down the mug. "Later, in a brief moment by the supply closet," she whispered. "Did you find anything?" Christopher's gaze was steady. "Yes, it's bigger than you think, but you were right to trust me." Fear flickered across her face. "What do I do?" "For now, nothing. Keep working. Keep smiling. Let Victor think everything is normal. The more invisible you are, the safer you and Lila will be." Naomi swallowed hard and nodded. "I don't know why you're helping me." Christopher's voice softened. "Because once, someone helped me when I had nothing. Because no one should feel alone in the dark." Her eyes shimmered, but she turned away quickly as another customer called for service. Across the diner, Victor Kane watched them. His eyes narrowed. He had always prided himself on noticing the smallest details who lingered too long, who whispered when they thought he wasn't looking. And something about Naomi Carter and the quiet man by the window made his instincts prickle. That evening, back at his hotel, Christopher received another encrypted update from Elena. "We traced Victor's side accounts. He's funneling money through a vendor called Nash Logistics, but Nash doesn't exist. The address belongs to an abandoned warehouse on the south side. Trucks go in and out at night. No legitimate invoices. We think it's a laundering hub." Christopher's eyes hardened. "Can you get eyes on it?" "Already done. One of our field contacts is watching. They've seen unmarked boxes unloaded, cash exchanged. It's a full operation." Christopher leaned back, exhaling. This wasn't just theft. It was organized corruption, feeding off neighborhoods like Naomi's, draining communities already on the edge. "Elena," he said, "we'll need hard evidence, photos, ledgers, witnesses. When this breaks, it has to be undeniable." "Understood. But Christopher," Elena paused, "if Victor suspects Naomi leaked anything, she and her daughter are targets. We can't protect them from the shadows forever." Christopher's silence stretched before he answered. "Then we make sure Victor never gets the chance." That night, Christopher walked through the city streets, blending in among workers heading home, couples laughing outside bars, homeless men curled in doorways. He passed unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. Yet his mind turned over strategy after strategy. He knew how to dismantle corporations, how to expose fraud on Wall Street, how to corner billionaires in boardrooms. But this was different. Here, the battlefield wasn't marble conference tables or investment portfolios. It was a tired diner, a frightened waitress, and a little girl who drew houses with bright suns in the corner. As he walked, he thought of Lila's drawing Naomi had described. A neat home, a big sun, a dream too fragile for the world they lived in. He thought of Naomi's whispered words, her trembling hands. He thought of the courage it took to slip him that note in the first place. And Christopher Hale made a silent vow. He would not fail them. The Harbor Light Diner smelled of burnt toast and coffee grounds that morning. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the busy street outside. Naomi Carter moved quickly between tables, her smile fixed though her heart beat unevenly. Victor Kane had been watching her more closely these past few days. His eyes followed every step, every word, as though he sensed a shift he couldn't name, and Naomi knew she was running out of space to breathe. Christopher Hale sat in his usual booth, calm as always, sipping coffee with that quiet patience that unnerved Victor more than he admitted. Christopher's presence had become a pattern, too regular, too intentional. Victor leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his tie loosened but his stare sharp. "Naomi," he barked. "Table 4's been waiting." "Yeah, sir," Naomi replied, keeping her voice light. She hurried to deliver plates, but her hands trembled slightly as she set them down. She could feel Victor's eyes drilling into her back. Marcus Reed flipped eggs on the grill, his jaw tight. He'd seen Victor in these moods before. They always ended badly for someone. Christopher stirred his coffee slowly, watching the room with steady eyes. He noticed the way Naomi's smile faltered, the way Victor's gaze never softened. Every detail etched itself into his mind. Finally, Victor pushed away from the counter and strode toward Christopher's booth. He plastered on a smile, but his voice carried the sharp edge of a blade. "You must really like our coffee," Victor said. Christopher looked up calmly. "It's good enough." "Good enough." Victor chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Yet you keep coming back. Same booth, same time. That's unusual for a man I don't recognize around here." Christopher sipped his coffee, unbothered. "Maybe I like routine." Victor leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Or maybe you like watching things that aren't your business." The diner quieted. A few customers glanced up nervously. Sensing tension, Naomi froze near the counter, her heart hammering. Christopher set down his mug carefully. His voice was calm, steady as stone. "I watch what interests me, and I don't scare easily." Victor's eyes narrowed. For a moment, the facade slipped, and raw aggression flickered in his gaze. Then he straightened, forcing a laugh. "Enjoy your coffee." He walked back to the counter, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Naomi released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She dared a glance at Christopher. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes caught hers, giving the faintest nod. "I've got this." The day dragged on under Victor's shadow. Every mistake, every delay. He pounced on Naomi with cutting remarks. When she dropped a fork, he hissed, "Careless." When she paused to comfort a crying child at a table, he snapped, "You're not a babysitter." By the time her shift ended, Naomi's nerves were frayed raw. She wiped her hands on her apron, dreading the walk home. Lila was waiting, and Naomi didn't want her daughter to see the cracks in her armor. But as Naomi stepped out into the damp evening air, Victor followed. His shoes clicked on the wet pavement. "Naomi," he called. She froze, turning slowly. "Yes." Sir Victor's smile was thin, stretched too tight. "That man? The one in your section? Who is he?" Naomi forced a shrug. "Just a customer. Comes in for coffee." Victor's eyes searched her face. "Funny. He doesn't eat much, doesn't talk much, just sits there, watching. And you seem nervous around him." Naomi shook her head quickly. "I treat everyone the same." Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know what happens to people who forget where their loyalty lies?" Naomi's throat went dry. She shook her head. "They make mistakes," Victor whispered. "And mistakes have consequences. Think about your little girl." Naomi's knees almost buckled, but she held herself steady. "I'll remember, sir." Victor smirked, then turned back toward the diner, leaving her trembling in the rain. Naomi walked quickly, nearly running by the time she reached her building. Inside her apartment, she locked the door twice and pressed her back against it, shaking. Lila looked up from the couch, concern etched on her small face. "Mom, you okay?" Naomi forced a smile, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm fine. Baby, just a long day. That night." Naomi sat at the kitchen table, staring at Christopher's plain card with the 10 digits. Her hands hovered over her phone. She wanted to call, to hear his steady voice, but fear held her back. If Victor found out. Meanwhile, across town, Christopher met Elena Brooks in a dimly lit office above a quiet bookstore. She had flown in discreetly, her presence known only to Christopher and his most trusted team. "Victor's suspicious," Christopher said. "He confronted me today." Elena arched a brow, and I didn't flinch. "But he's watching Naomi closely. He even followed her after work." Elena frowned. "That puts her and Lila at greater risk. We need to move faster." Christopher nodded. "What do you have on the warehouse?" Elena slid a folder across the table. Inside were grainy photos trucks at night, men unloading crates, stacks of unmarked bills. "This is bigger than we thought. Drugs, cash, maybe even weapons. Victor isn't just laundering. He's a node in a criminal web." Christopher studied the photos, his jaw tight. "Then it's time to put pressure on the cracks. We expose one link, the rest will follow." Elena leaned forward, and Naomi Christopher's voice softened. "She's the key, but she can't know everything yet. The more she knows, the greater her danger." Elena gave a skeptical look. "And you're already in deeper than most would dare." "Why her? Why this fight?" Christopher looked out the window at the rain-slick streets. He thought of Naomi's trembling hands, her whispered confession, her daughter's hopeful drawing. Because some fights aren't about profit. They're about dignity. And if I walk away now, I'll be no better than the men who exploit her. Elena studied him quietly, then nodded. "Then we'll see this through. But be careful. Christopher, men like Victor don't go down quietly." As the rain eased outside, Christopher felt the storm within sharpen into resolve. Victor Kane had shown his teeth. The first confrontation had come and gone. The next would not be so simple. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Rain tapped against the window, steady and soft. But Naomi Carter's mind refused to rest. She sat at the kitchen table, bills scattered before her, the plain card with 10 digits resting on top. Her hand hovered above the phone. She wanted to call Christopher Hale, to tell him what Victor had said outside the diner, how the threat against Lila echoed in her ears. But fear kept her still. If she called, and Victor somehow found out, if someone listened in, if anything happened to her little girl. Naomi pressed her palms to her face and exhaled shakily. She thought of Lila asleep in the next room, her small body curled beneath the quilt Mrs. Lopez had sewn. Lila's safety was the center of every choice Naomi made, and right now, every path felt like a trap. Her mind pulled her backward, to memories she rarely allowed herself to relive. She was 14 when her father walked out. He left nothing but an old guitar and broken promises. Her mother worked herself sick trying to keep food on the table. Naomi had promised herself then that she would never let her child know that kind of abandonment, that kind of fear. And yet here she was, feeling the walls close in. Naomi rose and poured herself a glass of water. Pacing the kitchen, she thought about Victor's eyes, the way his voice had curled around the words, "Think about your little girl." She shivered. It wasn't an idle threat. Victor had the power to hurt people. She had seen waitresses disappear from shifts, fired for reasons that never made sense. One of them, Sherry, had quietly told Naomi she was being followed home before she quit. Naomi hadn't believed her fully then. Now, she did. She thought of Christopher, the way he sat in the booth, steady as stone, unshaken even when Victor tried to intimidate him. There was something in his calm that pulled her like a magnet. He wasn't just a customer. She could feel it in her bones. And yet, trusting him was its own risk. What if he was part of it? What if this was a test, some cruel trick to see if she would betray her silence? Naomi rubbed her arms, the cold seeping through her, even inside the apartment. She wished her mother were still alive, someone to call for wisdom. Her mother would have said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. Naomi, it's choosing what matters more than fear." Naomi closed her eyes and whispered into the stillness, "Mama, I don't know if I'm strong enough." From the bedroom, a soft voice stirred. Mom Naomi turned quickly. Lila stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, holding her worn stuffed rabbit. "Bad dream?" Naomi asked, forcing her voice to steady. Lila nodded. "I dreamed you were gone." Naomi knelt, pulling her daughter into her arms. "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I'm right here. But you look scared," Lila whispered against her shoulder. Naomi blinked back tears, even in her dreams. Lila could sense the truth Naomi tried to hide. She kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared too, but we keep going, and we keep each other safe." She tucked Lila back into bed, smoothing the quilt over her small frame. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart. Dream about sunshine in that house you drew for us." Lila smiled faintly, drifting back into dreams. Naomi lingered by the doorway, watching her daughter breathe peacefully, and something shifted inside her. Fear was still there, sharp and heavy, but it wasn't the only thing. There was also love, fierce, unbreakable, love that made her capable of more than she believed. The next morning, Naomi walked to the diner with her head held a little higher. The air was crisp, the streets slick with last night's rain. She told herself over and over, "I will not let Victor break me. I will not let him take Lila's future." Inside, the diner bustled as usual. Marcus Reed nodded at her from the grill. "Mr. Dirt?" Harris read his paper in his booth, and Christopher sat by the window, his eyes meeting hers with quiet assurance. She poured his coffee, and under her breath, she whispered, "He followed me last night." Christopher's gaze sharpened, though his voice remained calm. "I know. I'll take care of it." Naomi's throat tightened. "How trust me," he said simply. For the first time, she didn't feel the immediate urge to doubt. She nodded and moved away, her heart steadier. But Victor was watching. He always was. His gaze tracked every movement, every stolen glance. Naomi felt the weight of it, but instead of shrinking, she forced her smile brighter. She carried plates with practiced grace, her back straight, her voice warm to customers. If Victor wanted her broken, he wouldn't get the satisfaction. That afternoon, while clearing a table, Naomi overheard two men at the counter whispering about the warehouse and a new shipment. Her stomach turned, but she kept wiping the table, pretending not to listen. Later, in the tiny staff room, she wrote the words down on a scrap of paper and slipped it into her pocket. Another piece of the puzzle for Christopher. By the time her shift ended, Naomi felt the exhaustion pressing hard again. Yet beneath it was something different. Resolve. Walking home. She noticed a man leaning against a lamppost across the street. Her chest clenched. Was he watching her? But when she turned fully, he'd lit a cigarette and walked away. She quickened her pace, heart pounding. Inside the apartment. She double-locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Then she pulled the scrap of paper from her pocket. Staring at the words, warehouse, shipment. She reached for the phone and dialed the 10 digits Christopher had given her. The line rang once, twice. Then his calm voice answered, Naomi. Her breath shook, but her voice was steady. I think I have something you need to know. Christopher Hale answered Naomi Carter's call in the middle of the night, his voice calm but alert. Naomi. Her breath trembled through the line. At the diner today, I overheard 2 men. They mentioned a warehouse and a shipment. Christopher leaned back in the chair of his dimly lit hotel room, the glow of the skyline cutting through the blinds. Did they say when no? Naomi whispered. Just that it was big. They didn't see me listening. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. You did the right thing, Christopher said firmly. Keep that note safe. I'll take it from here. Naomi's voice cracked. Christopher, he followed me again last night. I can't keep living like this. Lila, she deserves better. Christopher closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tight. I know, and I promise you, Naomi, this ends soon. You're not alone anymore. When the call ended, Christopher immediately dialed another secure number. Helena Brooks answered on the first ring. Helena, he said, his tone low. We have a lead, a warehouse, a shipment. Cross-check Victor Kane and Nash Logistics. I want eyes on every truck, every dock, every abandoned property they use. Already on it. Helena replied. Our field contact near the south side saw unusual movement last week. Trucks coming in past midnight. No manifests. It fits. Good. Christopher said. Get me photos, videos, times, and Elena make sure no one notices. If Victor suspects we're watching, Naomi and her daughter become targets. Silence stretched for a moment. Then Elena's voice softened. Christopher, you're carrying this heavy. Too heavy. Christopher's lips curved into the faintest smile. I've carried worse, but Naomi hasn't. That's why we can't fail. The next day, the Harbor Light diner buzzed with the usual clatter of plates and chatter of customers. But for Naomi, every sound felt sharper, every glance heavier. Victor Kane lingered near the counter, his eyes cutting toward her whenever she passed. Christopher sat at his booth, calm as ever, sipping his coffee. Their eyes met briefly. He gave a slight nod. The unspoken message clear. Hold on. Help is moving. Naomi forced herself to smile at customers, to laugh lightly at a regular's joke. But inside, fear and hope warred. She slipped the scrap of paper into Christopher's hand while clearing his table. Her movements practiced and casual. To anyone else, it looked like a waitress picking up a receipt. That night, Christopher studied the note under a lamp in his suite. Warehouse, shipment. 2 words, but enough to shift the tide. He called Elena again. We traced Nash Logistics to a derelict warehouse off Halstead Street. Elena reported, our contact saw men unloading crates last night. He got photos, cash bundles, unmarked boxes, some kind of ledgers. This isn't just laundering. It's distribution. Drugs. Maybe weapons. Christopher's hand clenched into a fist. Victor's in deeper than we thought. And he's careful, Elena added. He never shows up himself. Always middlemen. But the money trails back to his accounts. Christopher paced the room, his mind moving like a chessboard. If we can get those ledgers, Victor's finished. But we can't just walk in. Elena hesitated. I could get local law enforcement. No, Christopher cut in sharply. Too risky. They're compromised. Naomi already tried once, and nothing happened. This has to be airtight before anyone official touches it." Elena's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we do it our way." Christopher stopped pacing. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window. A man who looked ordinary but carried the weight of extraordinary responsibility. "Yes, our way." 2 nights later, Christopher stood in the shadows near the Halstead warehouse. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of oil and rust. Elena's contact, a wiry man named David Chen, crouched beside him with a camera. "Movement at the south entrance," Chen whispered. Christopher adjusted the binoculars. A truck rolled up, headlights cutting through the darkness. 3 men jumped out, their movements brisk and practiced. They unlocked the rusted door, revealing stacks of crates inside. Chen clicked photos rapidly. The shutter was muffled, but each sound felt loud in the stillness. Christopher's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of a man carrying a black duffel bag inside. Cash, most likely. Another man flipped through a ledger, jotting notes. "Proof." "Got it," Chen whispered. "Clear shots." Christopher exhaled. Good. That's one piece. But his mind was already ahead. Victor would not go down from photos alone. They needed a direct link, undeniable evidence that tied him personally to the crimes. And Naomi's safety depended on timing. Too soon, and Victor would lash out. Too late, and the window could close forever. The following morning at the diner, Naomi noticed Christopher looked different, not outwardly, but in the steadiness of his eyes, the certainty of his movements. She poured his coffee and whispered, "Did you find it?" Christopher's lips curved in a faint smile. "Yes, and it's worse than we thought. But we're close." Her breath hitched. "Close to what? Justice," he said simply. Naomi's eyes stung with tears she couldn't shed in public. She nodded, moving away before Victor could notice. But Victor had noticed something else. Christopher's calm confidence, Naomi's flicker of hope. He leaned against the counter, suspicion gnawing at him. His instinct screamed that something was shifting, though he couldn't yet prove it. That night, Christopher convened with Elena again. They spread the photos and notes across a table. "This is enough to start," Elena said. "We could leak it to the press anonymously. The story would explode." Christopher shook his head. "Not yet. If we go public now, Victor disappears into the wind, and Naomi's life becomes collateral. We need one more piece, something that ties him directly. Bank transfers, recorded calls, maybe even a confession." Elena studied him. "You're going to bait him." Christopher met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, and when he takes it, we end this." The Harbor Light Diner smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon that morning, but Naomi Carter barely noticed. Her nerves were frayed. She had been up half the night listening to every creak of her apartment floorboards, terrified Victor Kane might appear outside again. When she walked in, the diner was unusually quiet. Regulars stared into their mugs instead of chatting. Marcus Reed gave her a look half warning, half concern as she tied her apron. Victor was already there. He leaned against the counter with that smug half smile, stirring his coffee slowly, though it was nearly empty. His presence was like a storm cloud hovering in the small space. "Morning, Naomi," he drawled, his eyes following her every step. "Sleep well." Her throat tightened, but she forced a polite smile. "Can I get you a refill?" Victor's grin widened. "Always so professional. That's why I like you." She poured without meeting his gaze. Her hands trembled, and a drop splashed onto the counter. He leaned closer, whispering so only she could hear. "You've been busy lately? Talking to people? Making friends?" His eyes flicked toward Christopher Hale, who sat calmly at his usual booth, reading the paper. That man, he's not from around here. Be careful who you trust. Naomi froze, then forced herself to step back. Enjoy your coffee. Christopher folded his paper deliberately, his movement steady, deliberate. He glanced at Victor just long enough to acknowledge him neither submissive nor aggressive, simply measured. It unsettled Victor in a way Naomi couldn't see. The morning passed with Naomi trying to steady her breath, but when she slipped into the back room to catch a moment of air, Victor followed. "You think you're clever," he hissed, his hand gripping her arm too tightly. "I know you're hiding something, and if you keep crossing me, you'll regret it." Naomi's chest heaved, fear choking her. "Please." My daughter Victor's expression flickered, a flash of satisfaction at her fear. Then he released her and stepped back, his voice calm again. "Good. Remember what's at stake." She rushed out, eyes wet, but Christopher intercepted her near the kitchen door. He lowered his voice. "What happened?" Naomi shook her head, terrified to speak. Her lips trembled. "He knows." Christopher's jaw tightened. "Then it's time to move faster." That night, Christopher and Eleanor Brooks met again in the dim hotel suite. The photos and notes from the warehouse lay spread across the table. "Victor's escalating," Christopher said. "He cornered Naomi today. It's only a matter of time before he does something reckless." Eleanor leaned forward. "Then we hit first. The ledgers, the cash, the trucks that's enough for the feds. We just need to connect it directly to him." Christopher rubbed his temples. He's cautious, but his ego, that's where he slips. He needs to feel in control. If I provoke him, he'll try to shut me down personally. That's when we catch him. Elena studied him, concern flickering in her eyes. That's dangerous. Chris, he won't play by rules. Christopher met her gaze, calm but resolute. Neither will I. The next day, Victor strutted into the diner as if he owned it. This time, Christopher stood as he approached. "Mr. Kane," Christopher said, his tone level but firm. "You seem to spend a lot of time here for a manager. Shouldn't you be overseeing something bigger?" Victor's smirk faltered. "And who are you to ask just a man who notices patterns?" Christopher replied, "And your pattern is sloppy." A hush fell across the diner. Even the clink of silverware stopped. Naomi's heart pounded. She wanted to scream at Christopher to stop, to not provoke him. Victor's face darkened, but he forced a laugh. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. But guts don't keep you alive in this neighborhood." Christopher leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "Neither does arrogance." For a beat, the two men stared at each other. Then Victor shoved his hands in his pockets and stalked out, but not before muttering, "You'll regret this." That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. Every noise outside made her flinch. When Lila stirred in the next room, she sat by her bed, whispering softly until the child fell back asleep. She thought about Christopher, how calm he'd been, how fearless, and yet she worried that his boldness might paint a target on his back, and hers. The following evening, the diner was nearly empty when the front door slammed open. Two of Victor's men swaggered in, rough and loud, making a show of knocking chairs aside. Marcus Reed stepped out from the kitchen, a spatula still in hand. "We're closed," he said firmly. One of the men sneered. "Not for us." "You're not." Naomi froze behind the counter, her pulse thundering in her ears. She knew exactly what this was intimidation. Then Christopher rose from his booth. moving with the kind of calm authority that silenced even the thugs. "Enough," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "You've made your point. Now leave." The larger of the two laughed. "Or what you gonna call the cops? Everyone knows they won't show." Christopher didn't flinch. "No, I'll deal with it myself." The tension stretched until even the men seemed uncertain. Finally, with a bark of laughter that sounded more forced than real, they turned and left, the bell above the door jingling as it swung shut. Naomi exhaled shakily, her knees weak. "Christopher, you can't keep confronting them. They'll come back harder." Christopher looked at her, his eyes steady. "That's exactly what I want. When they overreach, we'll have them. And when we have them, Victor falls." Naomi pressed a hand to her chest, torn between fear and fragile hope. I don't want to lose everything." Christopher's expression softened. "You won't. Not this time. Not with me here. Outside." Victor watched from across the street, hidden beneath the brim of his hat. His fist clenched as he saw Christopher steady Naomi, saw the flicker of trust in her eyes. His voice was a low growl. "So that's how it is." He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark, and muttered to himself, "If she won't learn the easy way, she'll learn the hard way." The city streets glistened with last night's rain, neon lights flickering against wet pavement. Christopher Hale stood by the hotel window, phone pressed to his ear. On the other end, Elena Brooks's voice carried urgency. "Chris, it's happening. Victor just made his move. A truck left the Halstead warehouse an hour ago. Our contact followed. Its destination is Eastgate storage yard. The timing is sloppy, too obvious. He's getting desperate." Christopher's grip on the phone tightened. Desperation means mistakes, and mistakes give us leverage. He turned, grabbing his jacket. "Stay close on that truck. Don't intervene. I want to see who meets it. We need a clean connection." When he hung up, Christopher exhaled deeply. Naomi Carter's face flashed through his mind, her tired eyes, the tremble in her voice, her daughter clinging to her apron as she left for work. The thought of Victor tightening his grip on them lit a fire in his chest. At the Harbor Light Diner the next morning, Naomi served coffee with forced steadiness, but her eyes darted to the door every time it opened. Victor hadn't shown up yet, and that silence was worse than his presence. Christopher entered quietly, settling into his booth. Naomi slipped over to pour his coffee, her whisper trembling. "He's been quiet. Too quiet." Christopher looked at her calmly. "That's because he's moving, but he's slipping. Trust me, Naomi. His time is running out." Her breath caught, half in hope, half in fear. She wanted to believe, but years of intimidation had buried her trust deep. That evening, Elena arrived at Christopher's suite. Photos spread across her tablet. Here, the truck offloaded at Eastgate's yard. And guess who was there? David Lang himself. Christopher's brows furrowed. "Regional Director." "Exactly. We've got photos of him checking crates, talking with Victor's men. If we connect Lang to Victor, we've tied corporate leadership into this mess." Christopher studied the images. Lang's polished suit looked out of place in the grimy yard, but his posture screamed authority. "This is it," Christopher murmured. "Victor's arrogance has pulled Lang into the light. If we get Lang on record, Victor has no shield." Elena's eyes narrowed. "How do you plan to get him talking?" Christopher's gaze hardened. "By giving him a reason to brag." The next day, Victor strutted into the diner like he owned it. But today, Christopher was ready. He motioned to Naomi. "May I borrow the back room for a moment?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Her heart thumped as Christopher stood to meet Victor halfway. "Mr. Kane," Christopher said, his tone smooth. "I hear you've been busy, running late-night deliveries, pulling in corporate brass. Quite a show for someone trying to stay invisible." Victor's smirk faltered, then sharpened. "You don't know what you're talking about." Christopher leaned closer. "Don't I, David Lang at Eastgate? Trucks moving cash, ledgers full of names. You've gotten sloppy. Victor, the wrong person might see it all." Victor's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you scare me." Christopher's expression was calm, almost bored. "I don't need to scare you. I just need to expose you." Victor shoved him, hard enough that Naomi gasped. The diner went silent, every customer frozen. Marcus Reed stepped forward from the kitchen, spatula still in hand, but Christopher raised a hand to stop him. "Careful," Christopher said evenly. "Every move you make now just digs the hole deeper." Victor's face flushed, his composure cracking. With a growl, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bell rattled. Naomi's hands shook as she refilled a mug. Christopher. What if Christopher cut her off gently? He already has, and now he'll rush. That's what we want. That night. Elena called again, excitement in her tone. "Chris, you won't believe this. Lang's hosting a private dinner tomorrow. Guess who's on the guest list? Victor Kane." I got hold of the seating chart. Christopher smiled faintly. "Perfect. That's where he'll feel safe enough to talk. And we'll be there." The following evening, Christopher dressed in a crisp gray suit, blending into the crowd at the upscale steakhouse. Elena worked the room in a tailored dress, discreetly placing recording devices. At the corner table, Lang and Victor sat with two associates. The men laughed over expensive wine. But Victor's laugh was forced, nervous. Lang, by contrast, exuded confidence, gesturing broadly as he spoke. Christopher and Elena took a nearby table. They didn't need to hear every word, just enough. Lang leaned in toward Victor, his voice carrying just enough to catch snippets. "The shipments are fine. The book's balanced. Kane, don't lose your nerve. We've got protection all the way up." Victor shifted uncomfortably, glancing around. Lang chuckled. "Relax. No one here cares who's greasing which wheels." Elena's discreet recorder captured every syllable. Christopher sipped his drink, his expression unreadable. But inside, satisfaction burned. This was the link they needed, Lang openly tying himself and Victor to the operation. When the dinner ended, Victor left first, looking unsettled. Lang lingered, smug and assured, before finally departing, back in the suite. Elena replayed the recording. The words rang clear protection all the way up. Christopher nodded. "That's it. With this, we tie Lang to Victor, Victor to the laundering, and both to Eastgate. Naomi will finally be safe." But Elena hesitated. "Chris, when Victor realizes he's cornered, he'll lash out. He'll go after Naomi, maybe even Lila. We need to move her somewhere safe." Christopher's expression hardened. "Then tomorrow, she and her daughter stay with me. No more nights looking over her shoulder." The next morning, Christopher arrived at the diner early. Naomi looked exhausted, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. He leaned closer. "Naomi, tonight, you and Lila come with me? Somewhere safe?" Her eyes widened. "Safe, Christopher. I can't just you can," he said firmly. "Victor knows he's losing control. He'll try something. I won't let him hurt you." Naomi's lip trembled. For the first time in years, someone was offering her protection without asking for something in return. She nodded slowly. Okay. Christopher placed a hand briefly over hers, steady and warm. Trust me. This ends soon. Across the street. Unseen behind tinted glass. Victor watched from his car. His jaw clenched as he saw Naomi's hand rest under Christopher's. His voice was low, bitter, seething. So that's how it is. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling against the windshield. She chose him. Fine. Then she goes down with him. The night air was heavy with the scent of exhaust and damp asphalt when Naomi Carter locked up the diner. She held Lila's small hand tightly, her eyes scanning the shadows of the parking lot. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of a street light set her nerves on edge. Christopher Hale had insisted on picking them up, but Naomi, stubborn in her independence, had said she could manage until the shift ended. Now, with darkness pressing in, she regretted it. "Mommy, why are we walking so fast?" Lila asked, her voice a whisper. Naomi forced a smile, though her chest was tight. "Just cold out. Baby, let's get home." Halfway down the block, a black sedan rolled up slowly behind them. Naomi's breath caught. The windows were tinted, the engine low and steady. Then the car door opened. Victor Kane stepped out, his shadow stretching across the pavement. "Well, well," he said, his tone deceptively casual. Out late again. Naomi instinctively pulled Lila closer. "Leave us alone." "Victor." Victor's smirk widened. "I tried that. Didn't work. You've been talking, whispering, making friends where you shouldn't." Naomi's heart pounded. "We don't know what you're talking about. Please, just let us go." Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping, venomous. "You think you can cross me and walk away? No one does that. Not in this city." Lila clutched her mother's hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy." Naomi's legs trembled, but she stood her ground, shielding her daughter. "If you hurt us, everyone will know. People are watching. Victor." Victor chuckled darkly. "Not enough." Suddenly, headlights flared at the end of the street. A silver SUV screeched to a stop. Christopher Hale stepped out, his expression calm but edged with steel. "Victor," Christopher called, his voice cutting through the night. "That's far enough." Victor turned, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into a scowl. "You again?" Christopher walked forward with measured steps, his eyes never leaving Victor's. "Let her go." "You don't want to do this," Victor sneered. "And who's going to stop me? You some stranger with a big mouth?" Christopher stopped just a few feet away, his posture unshaken. "Not just me. The moment you lay a hand on them, it's over. Cameras, witnesses, recordings, your empire crumbles in an instant. You're already hanging by a thread." Victor's jaw twitched, rage boiling beneath his skin. "You don't know who you're messing with." Christopher's tone dropped, steady and unflinching. "Neither do you." For a tense beat, no one moved. Naomi held her breath, her body trembling, shielding Lila behind her. Then Victor lunged, his hand darting toward Naomi. But before he could reach her, Christopher moved. With precise force, he blocked Victor's arm, twisting it just enough to send the man stumbling back. Victor roared in frustration, swinging again. But Christopher's movements were calm, controlled, defensive, never reckless. In seconds, Victor found himself on the pavement, winded, humiliated. Christopher stood over him, his voice quiet but lethal. "Walk away. Victor, this is your last chance." Victor spat onto the asphalt, his glare burning. This isn't over. He staggered to his feet, retreating toward his car. You'll regret crossing me. The sedan screeched away into the night, leaving silence in its wake. Naomi collapsed against Christopher, her breath shuddering. Lila buried her face in her mother's coat, sobbing softly. Christopher rested a steady hand on Naomi's shoulder. It's all right. You're safe now. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I was so scared. I thought Christopher's gaze softened. I know. But he won't get another chance. Tomorrow, you and Lila come with me. We finish this together. The next morning, Naomi and Lila arrived at Christopher's suite. For the first time in years, Naomi felt a fragile sense of safety. Helena Brooks greeted them warmly, kneeling to offer Lila a reassuring smile. Hi there, sweetheart, Elna said softly. We'll take good care of you. Lila peeked out from behind her mother's skirt, whispering, Is the bad man gone? Elna glanced at Christopher, who answered with quiet certainty, He's going to be. While Elna distracted Lila with crayons and a coloring book, Christopher guided Naomi to the dining table, where photos, notes, and recordings lay in neat rows. This is everything we have, Christopher explained. Victor's laundering operation, David Lang's involvement, Eastgate's connection. We're almost there, but last night proved he'll get more dangerous. We need to strike now. Naomi looked at the evidence, her voice low. What if it isn't enough? What if he walks free again? Christopher shook his head. Not this time. We've got Lang on tape. We've got photos of the warehouse. We just need one last piece, Victor himself acknowledging it. And we'll get it. Naomi's brows knit. How Christopher's expression hardened. By making him think he still has power. He'll come to me if he believes I'm standing in his way. And when he does, we'll be ready. That evening, Elena set up discreet surveillance near the diner. Christopher sat at his usual booth, waiting, while Naomi stayed home with Lila under Elena's protection. It didn't take long. Victor stormed into the diner, his rage barely contained. You think you can humiliate me in the street? He hissed, slamming his hand on Christopher's table. Christopher didn't flinch. You humiliated yourself. Victor leaned closer, his breath sharp with whiskey. I built this neighborhood. Every dollar runs through me, and no one takes that away. Not you. Not anyone. Click. Christopher's watch, innocuous and stylish, held a built-in recorder Elena had given him. Every word was captured. Christopher's eyes met Victor's steadily. Then you just admitted it. That's all we needed. Victor froze, realizing too late. Fury erupted across his face. You. But before he could strike, Marcus Reed stepped forward from the kitchen, holding a phone in plain view. Already streaming. Kane. Whole world's gonna see. Victor's eyes darted around the diner. Customers had their phones out too. Lenses trained on him. The predator had become the spectacle. With a roar, he shoved past and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Christopher exhaled, calm returning to his features. He turned to Marcus. Good thinking. Marcus shrugged, his grip on the phone steady. Man like that thrives in shadows. Best way to beat him, drag him into the light. Christopher's lips curved in a faint smile. Exactly. Outside. Sirens wailed in the distance. The tide was turning, and Victor Kane's empire was crumbling faster than he could hold it together. The morning after Victor Kane's outburst, the Harbor Light Diner buzzed with an energy Naomi Carter had never felt before. Customers whispered. Phones flashed with replayed clips, and for once, Victor's shadow seemed to shrink. Marcus Reed leaned against the counter, showing Naomi the live stream on his phone. "Look at this, already got 10,000 views. Folks are saying the guy finally got caught in his own trap." Naomi's hand shook as she refilled a mug. But for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear, it was from hope. She glanced toward Christopher Hale, who sat in his usual booth, calm as ever, sipping his coffee. His steady presence was the anchor holding her together. Across town, David Lang paced his office at Eastgate, sweat beading at his hairline. He had watched the video 3 times that morning, each replay making his stomach turn. Victor had been reckless, loud, and worst of all, recorded. Lang grabbed his phone, dialing furiously. When Victor answered, his tone was sharp. "What the hell were you thinking? Kane." Shouting in a diner, admitting everything while cameras rolled. "Do you realize what you've done?" Victor snarled back. "I didn't see them recording. It's just noise online. People forget." Lang's voice dropped to a growl. "Not this time. Hale isn't just some random stranger. He's baiting you, and you're falling for it." Victor's silence stretched. Then he hissed, "I'll handle him." Lang pinched the bridge of his nose. "You'd better, because if you go down, you drag me with you, and I won't let that happen." Back at the diner, Christopher's phone buzzed. Elna Brooks's voice came through, calm but edged with excitement. "Chris, the clip's going viral. Local reporters are sniffing around. If we push the warehouse photos now, tie them to Victor, it'll explode." Christopher stirred his coffee slowly. "Not yet. Lang will try to contain this. We let him panic. The more he scrambles, the more he leaves behind." Elena paused. "You're betting he'll make a mistake." Christopher's voice was steady. "He already has." That evening, Naomi sat at Christopher's suite, Lila asleep on the couch with crayons scattered around her coloring book. Naomi's voice trembled as she spoke. "Every day I waited for the hammer to fall, and now it feels like the ground's shifting under him instead of me." She looked at Christopher, eyes searching. "Do you really think this will end?" Christopher met her gaze, his expression softening. "It will. Not instantly. But he's bleeding credibility. Lang is scrambling. They're turning on each other. That's how men like them fall not by force, but by their own fear." Naomi let out a shaky breath, tears brimming. "You make it sound simple." Christopher shook his head gently. "It's never simple, but it is possible." Across the city, Victor slammed his fists against the bar top of a dim club. His crew shifted uneasily around him as he barked orders. "They think they can humiliate me. In front of everyone, I'll burn that diner to the ground before I let them win." One of his men muttered, "Boss, maybe we should lay low. The cops are sniffing around." Victor grabbed him by the collar, fury twisting his face. "There's no laying low. Not until I bury him." But even as he shouted, doubt gnawed at him. For the first time, Victor felt the walls closing in. The next morning, Elena burst into Christopher's suite with a laptop in hand. "Chris, you need to see this." A whistleblower just dropped documents online scans of ledgers from the warehouse. Names, numbers, transactions, Victor's fingerprints all over them. Christopher leaned in, scanning the files. The numbers were damning offshore accounts, coded payments, signatures that could be traced. "Who leaked this?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "Anonymous. But it doesn't matter. The timing is perfect. Journalists are already running with it." Naomi, listening from the couch, gasped softly. "Does this mean—" He's finished. Christopher's tone was cautious. It means he's cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. But yes, this is the beginning of the end. By afternoon, the diner was flooded with reporters. Cameras crowded the sidewalk, microphones shoved toward anyone willing to talk. Customers who once kept their heads down now spoke boldly about years of intimidation, protection rackets, threats. Naomi stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the chaos. For years she had been silenced by fear, but now the world was finally listening. Christopher stepped beside her. You don't have to talk to them yet. Just breathe. This is the storm before the calm. She looked at him, voice trembling. I'm not sure I'll ever feel calm again. Christopher's eyes softened. You will. When justice lands, calm follows. That night, Victor pounded on Lang's office door, storming inside without waiting. Lang's desk was littered with printouts of articles, his phone buzzing endlessly. You set me up. Victor spat. This was your idea. Moving shipments through Halstead. You dragged me into this mess. Lang stood slowly, his voice cold. No, Kane. You dragged me down with your stupidity. You think anyone believes I'd risk my career for you. You're the weak link, and weak links get cut. Victor's eyes narrowed, realization dawning. You'd sell me out. Lang didn't flinch. If it keeps me clean, every time. Victor's fists clenched, rage boiling. Then you'll go down with me? Lang smirked. We'll see. The confrontation left Victor shaken, his empire crumbling from both outside pressure and internal betrayal. Meanwhile, Elena intercepted an encrypted message on Lang's server. She showed it to Christopher. Contain Kane. Eliminate risk before Friday. Christopher's jaw tightened. Lang's cutting him loose, and he's dangerous enough to try to drag Naomi down as a final act. Naomi overheard, her hands trembling. So it's not over. He'll still come for me. Christopher placed a steady hand over hers. Yes, but now he's exposed. Every step he takes, eyes are on him, and that's when he makes the fatal mistake. Naomi's breath shuddered, but for the first time she didn't look away. She whispered, Then I'll be ready. Christopher studied her, admiration flickering in his gaze. You already are. Across town. Victor sat alone in his car, chain-smoking, rage gnawing at his insides. He had lost his grip on the streets, his allies crumbling, his boss turning against him. But one thought burned through the chaos. If he was going down, he'd take someone with him, and Naomi Carter's name pulsed in his mind like a curse. The wind howled down the south side streets that Thursday night, rattling broken signs and pushing trash along the gutters. Naomi Carter locked the door of Christopher Hale's suite, her hand lingering on the bolt. Lila was asleep in the bedroom, and for the first time Naomi allowed herself to breathe a little easier. But peace was fragile. She knew Victor Kane wasn't finished. A man like him never surrendered quietly. Christopher paced near the window, phone in hand. Elena Brooks' voice crackled through the line. We've got chatter, she said. Victor's gathering his men tonight. Word is, he's planning something bold. Maybe fire, maybe a raid. He wants to make an example before the weekends. Christopher's jaw tightened. Then we don't wait. We set the trap tonight. Elena hesitated. Chris, Naomi and Lila, are they safe where they are? Christopher glanced at Naomi, who stood watching him, fear flickering in her eyes. They're safer with me than anywhere else, but we can't run forever. This ends here, that same hour. Victor sat in a dingy warehouse with 4 of his men. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. His voice was sharp, bitter. They think I'm weak. They think they can laugh at me. Tonight, we remind them who owns this city." One of his men shifted uneasily. "Boss, cops are all over. That video. People are watching. Maybe we should—" Victor slammed his fist on the table, rattling the bottles. "No maybes. We take her. The waitress. She's the one who started this. Hale won't save her when she's gone." The men fell silent. No one dared contradict him again. Meanwhile, Christopher and Elena finalized their plan. They had tipped off a federal task force quietly, supplying evidence through encrypted channels. But they knew Victor wouldn't be arrested peacefully. They needed to force his hand, to draw him into the open with cameras ready. "Naomi," Christopher said gently, turning to her, "I need your courage one more time. Victor's coming for you, but we'll be ready." Naomi's throat tightened. "You're asking me to face him." Christopher stepped closer, his gaze steady, not alone. "With me, with Elena, with the law watching this time. If he tries, it'll all be on record, and that will end him." Naomi's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to shield her daughter. But deep inside, a stronger voice whispered, "This is the only way to break free." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it. That night." Naomi returned to the Harbor Light Diner with Christopher by her side. Marcus Reed kept the back door open for them, his face tense. "You sure about this?" he asked. Christopher's nod was firm. "We need him to show his hand." Naomi slipped behind the counter, her apron trembling in her grip. Every second stretched like an hour. At midnight, the door burst open. Victor stormed in, flanked by two men. His eyes locked on Naomi instantly, dark with rage. "There you are," he snarled. "You thought you could humiliate me, thought you could run." Naomi's breath caught, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I'm not running anymore." "Victor." Christopher rose from his booth, his voice calm but edged with steel. "It's over. Walk away, or face the consequences." Victor laughed bitterly. "Consequences, look around. No cops, no cameras. Just me, you, and her." But the faint red glow of a hidden camera light blinked above the counter. Elena's setup, disguised in the ceiling fan. Christopher's tone sharpened. "You're wrong. Everyone's watching." Victor froze for half a heartbeat. Then fury overtook him. He lunged across the diner, grabbing Naomi's arm. Lila's name ripped from her throat in a panicked cry. Christopher moved like a strike of lightning, slamming Victor back against the counter. The two men crashed into coffee cups and plates, shattering porcelain across the floor. Victor swung wildly, fists fueled by desperation. Christopher absorbed the blows, answering with calm, precise force, disarming rather than destroying. Naomi stumbled back, tears streaming, but Marcus steadied her, whispering, "He's got this. Just breathe." Outside, headlights flared. SUVs screeched to a halt, doors slamming as federal agents stormed the street. Elena led them in, badge flashing, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Drop it. Kane. You're done." Victor froze, chest heaving, sweat streaming down his face. He looked around the cameras, the agents, Christopher holding him firm, his empire, his bravado, his power all gone in a single moment. "No," Victor whispered, his voice breaking. "This isn't how it ends." Christopher leaned in, his voice quiet but devastating. "It's exactly how it ends." Victor sagged as agents dragged him back, handcuffs snapping around his wrists. He shouted curses, spitting venom, but his words carried no weight anymore. Naomi collapsed into a chair, sobs shaking her shoulders. Christopher knelt beside her, steadying her trembling hands. "It's over," he said softly. "He can't hurt you again." Naomi buried her face against his chest, years of fear breaking free in tears. Lila rushed from the back, woken by the commotion, and clung to her mother's waist. Naomi kissed the top of her daughter's head, whispering through her sobs, "We're safe, baby. We're safe now." Marcus exhaled deeply, leaning against the counter. "About time someone cut that man down." Elena stood nearby, arms folded, watching Christopher. "You pulled it off, exactly as you planned." Christopher shook his head. "Not just me." Naomi stood her ground. She was the bravest one here tonight. Naomi looked at him through her tears, her voice raw but strong. "I was terrified, but for the first time, I didn't feel alone." Christopher's eyes softened. "Because you weren't." Outside, as Victor was shoved into the back of a federal SUV, reporters swarmed, flashbulbs firing. The city finally saw the truth. The man who had terrorized them for years was just another criminal in cuffs. And inside the Harbor Light Diner, Naomi Carter held her daughter close, feeling the weight lift from her chest. For the first time in years, she believed tomorrow could be brighter. Morning light spilled across the Harbor Light Diner, painting soft streaks across the cracked linoleum and faded booths. The place smelled of fresh coffee and warm biscuits, a comforting reminder that life could, somehow, return to normal. Naomi Carter sat at her usual table, her hands cupped around a steaming mug. The world outside had shifted overnight. For the first time in years, she wasn't listening for Victor's footsteps or fearing what might come crashing through the door. Across from her, Christopher Hale studied her quietly, his eyes searching for the weight she carried. "You didn't sleep," he said gently. Naomi gave a tired smile. "How could I? It feels like my whole life changed in a single night." She shook her head slowly. "I keep waiting to wake up and find it was just another dream." Christopher reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "It wasn't a dream. You stood your ground. You saved yourself. You saved Lila. At the sound of her daughter's name." Naomi turned to see the little girl coloring at the counter with Marcus Reed watching over her. Lila's laughter carried across the diner, light and unburdened. For Naomi, it was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. "I used to think survival was the best I could hope for," Naomi whispered. "But maybe there's more." Christopher's expression softened. "There is. And you deserve all of it." The bell above the diner door jingled, and Elena Brooks entered, her presence crisp and professional as always. She dropped a folder on the table. "Victor Kane has been booked on multiple charges," she reported. "Racketeering, assault, intimidation. The feds also found records linking him directly to Nash Logistics and the falsified invoices you flagged." Naomi blinked. "It's really over," Elena nodded firmly. "He'll be facing trial. And with the evidence on tape last night, plus the federal charges, he won't be walking free again." Relief washed over Naomi, so sharp and sudden it nearly left her breathless. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Thank God." Christopher studied Elena. "And Eastgate. Already under investigation," Elena said. "Lang and the rest of his circle won't escape scrutiny. You've started something bigger than you realize." Naomi frowned. "You keep saying that. Who are you really?" "Christopher." The question hung in the air. Naomi had asked before, but this time there was no sidestepping it. She deserved the truth. Christopher leaned back, exhaling slowly. "My name is Christopher Hale. I'm not just a customer who wandered into this diner. I'm the CEO of Hale Enterprises." Naomi's eyes widened. A CEO, Marcus, overhearing from the counter, let out a low whistle. Christopher continued, voice calm but steady. "I came here undercover to see for myself how these chains were treating people. I've invested in Eastgate in the past, but I had suspicions about corruption, about exploitation. I needed to see it firsthand." He paused, meeting Naomi's gaze. "I didn't expect to find you, or to see such strength in someone who had been silenced for so long." Naomi's hand trembled around her mug. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity, another part to cry at the weight of it all. "So, all this time, you knew I knew there was something rotten in the system," Christopher said. "But you showed me the human cost. You reminded me why this fight matters." Naomi swallowed hard. "I don't know whether to thank you or be angry you kept this from me." Christopher's expression softened. "You can be both." The truth settled heavily. But strangely, Naomi didn't feel betrayed. Instead, she felt clarity. This man who had stood by her side, who had fought for her, wasn't just a rescuer. He was a partner who had chosen to see her worth when others didn't. Helena closed the folder and stood. Media's already buzzing. They're calling it the South Side Reckoning. "Naomi, your courage is part of the story now." Naomi flushed, shaking her head. "I don't want fame. I just want a safe life for Lila." Christopher smiled softly. "Sometimes telling the truth helps build that safety for you, and for others who don't have a voice." Naomi thought about it, her gaze drifting to Lila. Maybe sharing her story wasn't just about survival. Maybe it was about making sure no one else had to endure the same silence. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked with Christopher and Elena to the courthouse, where Victor was being arraigned. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Naomi hesitated at the edge of the crowd, her pulse quickening. She had never sought a spotlight, but when one reporter shouted, "Miss Carter, what do you want people to know?" she found her voice rising steady and clear. "I want people to know that dignity is not a privilege, it's a right. No one should be made to feel small, no matter their job, their color, or where they come from." The crowd hushed, pens scratching, cameras rolling. Naomi's words carried more weight than she realized. Christopher stood behind her, pride written across his face. That night, the diner filled with neighbors, Janice Lopez, Mr. Harris, Marcus, and others who had stood quietly by her side all those years. For once, there was no fear shadowing the room. Lila darted between tables, laughter ringing, while Naomi poured coffee with a lighter step. "Feels different in here," Marcus said with a grin. "Like we finally belong to ourselves again." Naomi smiled, glancing at Christopher. "It feels like hope." In the days that followed, Christopher used his influence to launch a fund for workers harmed by corporate abuse. Naomi was offered a chance to help lead it, her lived experience becoming a compass for reform. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready. But one evening, as she tucked Lila into bed, her daughter whispered, "Mama, you're my hero." Naomi pressed a hand over her heart. That was the answer she needed. Weeks later, she stood on a stage beside Christopher and Elena, speaking to a crowd about justice and dignity. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied. She told her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what mattered most to Naomi was the quiet smile on her daughter's face in the front row. Life didn't magically erase the scars. Naomi still woke some nights in a cold sweat. She still carried the memory of Victor's grip on her arm. But now she also carried something stronger, the knowledge that she wasn't powerless, and that her voice could spark change. As summer came, the Harbor Light Diner buzzed with new life. Tourists stopped in, drawn by the story they had read in the papers. Locals smiled easier, no longer glancing over their shoulders. One evening, Naomi and Christopher sat together in the quiet after closing. The air smelled of coffee and rain drifting in from the streets. "Do you ever regret it?" Naomi asked softly. "Regret what?" Christopher replied. "Coming here, getting involved, letting someone like me into your world." Christopher chuckled, shaking his head. "Naomi, you're not someone like you. You're you. And meeting you changed me more than all the boardrooms ever did." Naomi felt her chest warm. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe in something more than survival. She leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering, "Maybe this is just the beginning." Christopher's arm wrapped gently around her. "It is." And outside the Harbor Light Diner, the neon sign flickered against the dark, a small but steady beacon of hope in a city learning how to heal. Life often presents us with quiet crossroads, the moments where doing nothing feels safer. But speaking up can change everything. Naomi's story reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act even while trembling. Her note to Christopher wasn't just ink on paper. It was a declaration of dignity, a refusal to let silence steal her worth. For older audiences, the lesson is deeply resonant. Many of us know the weight of injustice, whether subtle or crushing. We have seen times when our voice felt small, but Naomi's courage teaches us that even a whisper, when spoken at the right time, can ignite change far beyond ourselves. The story also reflects the responsibility of those with power. Christopher shows that true leadership is not about wealth or titles. It's about using influence to protect, to uplift, and to reform broken systems. In our daily lives, we may not be billionaires or CEOs, but we can all choose dignity over fear, empathy over indifference, and truth over silence. That choice, repeated by many, becomes the foundation of hope and healing. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and for walking through this powerful journey. Stories like these only matter because of viewers like you who carry their lessons into the world. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of dignity, courage, and hope to light. Together, we can keep these voices alive.